Welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts, where we aim to encourage and foster discussion, learning, and creating an informed global community. To view this and other interviews in detail, head over to theseer.org, linked in the description. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel for constant updates. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. We are pleased today to be joined by author, behavioral psychologist, and all-round dinner host, Jon. How are you today?
I'm good. It's bright and beautiful in New York. The weather's changing, and I can't wait to finally get to see my friends soon.
So the first question would be, what is, I guess, the influencer dinner, and what has your journey been like overall?
The influencer's dinner is probably one of the worst meals my guests ever get to eat. It's a little strange. And the reason it's so terrible, or it's not terrible, but just not amazing, is that we invite 12 people to come and cook dinner together, but they have no idea how to cook. And there's a catch. They're not allowed to talk about what they do or even give their last name. Once the meal is ready, they sit down to eat and they guess what everybody does. And they find out that they're with a Nobel laureate, an 8-time Olympian, editor-in-chief of a popular magazine. I've hosted over 2,000 people at 227 dinners in 10 cities in 3 countries. And when there isn't a global pandemic taking place, I host them just about every month, 4 or 5 of them. And then I've also launched something called Inspired Culture, which is a salon series. And during that, we have about 60 to 100 people come in person, and we have 3 famous speakers present. It might be Bill Nye the Science Guy, or a famous architect like Bjarke Ingels, or maybe one of the former Roots perform. And so it's really turned into one of the most special communities of its type worldwide. As far as what actually started it, it's kind of silly, to be honest. I grew up really, really unpopular. And I kind of figured that if I could figure out how human beings behave, maybe I could make some friends. And so eventually I became a behavioral scientist. And so I ended up developing all these models to understand how to connect with people. And my objective wasn't just for me to connect with them, but for them to build relationships with each other. Because if they're extraordinary, I want them to know each other so that everybody's lives improve. And then maybe I'll get a secondary benefit as well. And so my objective turned from just networking, which often leaves people feeling really kind of dirty, to developing deep and meaningful friendships and a sense of community so that people can feel belonging.
So you mentioned some of the names that have attended your dinners, Bill Nye the Science Guy, other people. I guess what were some of the most memorable guests or things that have happened during your dinners?
Memorable wise, it's not the things that people expect. We had a dinner and we're about to finish what we're guessing for one person. And the person sitting next to them says, "There's no way you'll remember this, but I messaged you about 15 years ago, or 20 years ago at this point. And I asked what I should do with my career. And you suggested that I go into neuroscience. And I want to thank you because now I'm a neuroscientist, and this person's a very famous neuroscientist, 8 TED Talks, all that kind of stuff." And the person he was talking to was Nobel laureate Dan Kahneman, who redefined everything we understand about contemporary economics. Maybe not everything, but him and Amos Tversky developed behavioral economics, which showed that human beings don't act rationally. And to kind of bring somebody together with their hero like that was super cool. And that kind of stuff happens every so often. But I'll tell you this, everybody wants to meet like the Oprahs to Richard Branson's, like all those people. And that's great. I'm all for it. But the fact is that their lives are really full. And chances are you're not going to be able to develop a really long-term friendship with them. You might get a really nice selfie, which is fun. Your friends will like it. You'll seem cool. But it's the industry leaders rather than the global leaders that you'll really have the best chance of developing long-term relationships with.
So touching about the, I guess, the caliber of guests that come in, I'm sure that, and this is a problem that I'm sure most of our viewers or some of our viewers will experience, especially the younger ones. When you're in a room of such people, do you think that there is almost a level of imposter syndrome? And to the youth that are listening, any tips on how to fight imposter syndrome?
So let's separate that into two things. And I discuss this in my new book. It's called You're Invited, The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. But I think the first thing to understand is that there's something called Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger Effect found that the less we tend to know about something, the more confident we tend to be. And the more we know about something, the less confident. And the reason is that when we know very little, we don't know all the complexities. We don't know all the way things can go wrong. But when you get to like the top of an industry, you realize how hard it is, how complex, and all the things that are involved. You have a sense of complexity and chaos. And so you tend to feel less confident. And so the people at the top often feel the most imposter syndrome. So when you're starting off, you probably feel overconfident. That's fine. Enjoy it while you got it. But as a human being, you have a right to be in the room. You have a right to a voice, but that should never be confused with experience and knowledge, right? Now, as far as getting over it, I don't know if I can tell you how to do that because it's so different for each person. For some people, all they need to do is remind themselves that they're a badass and move forward anyway. For many people, they never get over it and still have wildly successful careers because just because you have imposter syndrome doesn't mean that it needs to stop you.
Sort of on the same wavelength, both tapping into the behavioral psychology scientist side of things, but also anecdotally hosting these people. Do you have any tips for students on how to improve confidence, projections, delivery, and stuff like that?
Sure. Oh, of course. So my lab partner at Kellogg did a study looking at what the greatest predictor of like a startup getting funded. And it turned out to be enthusiasm for the project. Second thing is, well, I'll give you two things. One is that there's this tendency to be like, oh my God, it's awesome. You're going to love it. Now, some people might view that as arrogant. And so the way around that is to say that you're really proud of it. So if instead of saying, oh my God, like I have this new book coming out, I say, oh my God, it's really good. You have to read it. Instead of that, if I say, I'd really love for you to check out the book. I put a ton of effort into the research and I'm really proud of the result. And I'm hoping you'll find it as interesting as, my mother does, or whatever it is. Then suddenly, instead of being something that you're bragging about, it's something that you're proud of for a good reason. The other is that there's also a stark difference, at least in older generations, I don't know about younger generations, in the way that we process if we deserve to speak or not. There's this wild study that was done about math exams. And the way it worked was they had a group of women take a math exam. And they were split up into three groups. I think it was the first group just took the exam, were tested. Group two were reminded that they were women before they took the exam. And because in America, there's a stereotype that women are worse at math, they ended up scoring worse. But there's also a stereotype in America that people of Asian descent are better at math. And so when the women who were Asian were reminded that they were Asian before the exam, they actually did better than the average. And that's wildly fascinating. It means that we can cue ourselves to behave or perform well simply based on reminding ourselves of why we're deserving of that performance.
Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. To learn more about Orakui as well as more information about our upcoming episodes, don't forget to follow our socials for constant updates and education content. Links are always in the description.
In general, the next question would be, how has COVID affected hosting the dinners, hosting your saloons, but also I guess, your consultancy business?
So I'll start off with the consultancy. I lost, I believe it was 72% of my company overnight, because everybody was canceling events, and I worked with companies on developing deep and meaningful relationships. I go into this kind of in depth in the book, that when COVID hit, I wasn't willing to risk people's lives. It just wasn't a game I was willing to play. So we shut down operations immediately, canceled a whole slew of events. And we haven't done an in-person event since, right? It's been a year now. And so we went straight into researching, why do people actually attend events, right? If we want to run a digital event, why do people actually attend them? And the general wisdom is you attend an event to be entertained and to gain knowledge. The problem with that is that if I'm going to host an event on Zoom or something like that, and I just try to give you knowledge, well, you might as well just go to YouTube and get a better recorded version. Or you might as well go to Netflix and be entertained by something. Because you're not going to ever be able to produce the production quality of a YouTube or a Netflix on Zoom. It's just the technology doesn't allow for it. So we have to ask the question, why do we actually attend events? And I would argue there's at least two other reasons, possibly four. And the two main ones are human connection, the experience of being around people. The second is having a sense of influence. Human beings don't do well when we feel like we have no effect on the environment. When we're at a concert or a show or something like that, we can clap, we can sing, we can scream, we can boo. We have an impact on the people around us. So what we ended up doing was redesigning what a digital event will be from scratch. We first and foremost focused on the attendees to give them a sense of belonging, a sense of influence, the ability to connect with each other, and also provide some entertainment and enlightenment. And a lot of that happened through games. So in the first weeks, we produced about an hour and a half of content, a lot in breakout rooms, so people could connect with each other. We literally invented games so that people could play together and have fun to reduce the pressure, because when stress is high, pro-social activities like games, hiking, sports, that kind of stuff actually bonds people and reduces their stress. And so people would come on, we'd welcome them, we'd send them into breakout rooms to meet each other. We'd have two presentations that were super short, really valuable. Maybe it was funny, maybe it was educational. And then we'd do more breakout rooms where people would get to meet more people, and we'd have a game show or a contest. And the winning team would get something absolutely ridiculous. And so we had the president of Hanes give the winning team a year's supply of underwear. When we first started, we planned about an hour and a half of content. By the end of, not by the end, by the time there were like riots taking place in the US, it was lasting 5 hours. That's a crazy amount of time for 150 people to be engaged. Now, not all of them were engaged at the end, but it was still like 50 people several hours in, which is crazy.
Do you think whether, like, scientifically, empirically, or anecdotally, there are different tips for engagement and attention in a in-person event and online event, in terms of me as a speaker speaking online, in person, staring at the camera? Are there any like simpler tips than that versus planning out games?
I take my video tips from video game streamers. Right, so even you look at my microphone, this is like a gaming mic, it can do this. And the reason I say that is that these are people who need to keep an audience of potentially thousands entertained for hours on it. And so, I mean, if you really look, they'll have a good view and good lighting, and there'll be dynamic positioning, meaning that you're not necessarily always seeing everything from the same angle. It's something I call perspective fatigue, which is, as a human being, we're not really used to just staring at one angle continuously and then hoping that it'll all, like, not rather hoping, but it's just not dynamic or interesting to us, right? And so what I do is I look at how to add a dynamic angle or perspective and so on, so that way it feels fresh and it kind of resets people's viewing. How do you make it interactive? Are you using poll features? Are you asking questions? Because if it's not interactive, if it doesn't have that sense of influence, it's not going to be enjoyable. So rather than just saying the happiest place on earth is whatever it is, I will launch a poll that asks, which of these places do you think is the happiest place on earth? Now, there's a careful medium. You don't want to be answering a question every 3 seconds, but it gives a dynamic feeling to the experience.
Are you finding any trends in terms of companies adapting towards COVID?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
New disruptive technologies and stuff like that?
Disruptive technologies, I'm not sure. I've tried to play with a lot of second screen tech. There's technologies out there that are trying to produce rendered environments where you walk around so that you have unequal sound. And that might sound a little strange, but if you have 50 people on a Zoom, you can see almost all of them in one screen now. And the problem is that you can hear them all equally. Now, it might seem strange that I would call that a problem, but in reality, that will never happen, right? You generally be able to hear the people closest to you better. And the reason that's important is that it means that Jonathan and I could pull you aside and have a conversation, even in a room with 50 people, and we could have a private, intimate conversation. That doesn't exist on Zoom. So I think there are companies trying to solve those kinds of problems. Loneliness is on par with about smoking a pack a day of cigarettes in terms of the impact on our health and wellness. That's pretty crazy. By being lonely, you're literally cutting years off of your life. And so companies are now really concerned with how to give people a sense of belonging and connection while at a distance. And they also understand that some people will not be returning to the office once everybody's vaccinated. People are going to want to stay disconnected. So now there's a problem of, will the people who work in the office be considered the real employees, while the people who work at home, who are on conference calls and Zooms with them, considered like the second status, because they're not getting to bond with everybody through hallway conversations and water cooler conversations. So that's all of this is to say that companies are really concerned with the health and mental well-being of their employees, especially because if they feel less connected to the company because they're isolated, then they might want to move to another company, and then they've just lost a lot of talent, and that's really expensive.
Individually, do you think there are changes to our behavior, attention span as a result of COVID, the use of technology to learn to do business?
So I think in terms of doing business, one of the biggest barriers we had was connecting with people to begin with. But right now, everybody's over Zoomed, overworked, over emailed, and stressed out. And so why on earth would they take a random email from a stranger trying to sell them something? And so we have to reimagine the entire process of how we connect with people. We have to understand the people's brains mechanics. It's setting a standard email won't work. Human beings respond to novelty when things are new and different. And it actually triggers a response that causes us to want to explore and understand what we're seeing or hearing. And the IKEA effect states that we disproportionately care about our IKEA furniture because we had to assemble it. Anything we invest effort into, we care about disproportionately. At the influencers dinner, we get people to cook together so that they end up caring more about the experience and each other. Now, that's generally not going to work online because it would be a terrible lift and shift, meaning when you take in-person experiences and put them online, they tend not to work. But instead, what we do is we create teams and play games and do activities. As a byproduct of playing together, people end up caring more about each other. The key is that it has to be something you actually enjoy, because by the fourth time, you're going to start hating it and not wanting to do it anymore. And that's just going to suck. So you want to create some kind of experience that'll cause people to put in effort that you actually enjoy participating in so you can bond with them.
What were some of the countries you enjoyed the most? What were some of the events you enjoyed the most?
So the place I loved the most was Antarctica. Penguins are awesome. Anybody who tells you otherwise is a jerk. Other than that, huge fan of Iceland. Where else have I been? I was, there's so many beautiful places on the planet, from Indonesia and the Philippines to, Israel or Stockholm, Sweden, or whatever, right? Like every place has something special to it.
So I guess that was countries. What events did you like the most?
Oh, wow. Stockholm has a celebration called Midsummer. It's actually celebrated a lot across Northern Europe and the Scandinavian countries. It's celebrated on the longest day of the year, and the parties are just great. I spent one of them, it was one of the craziest I've been to, was spent on the private family island of one of the members of Ace of Base, that old music band. And it was spent with like just a bunch of friends. I got randomly invited through a friend of a friend, and they were super welcoming, and it was amazing food. And we played Kub, which is this really weird game involving throwing pieces of wood. That was just a lovely, lovely day. I went to running of the bulls in Pamplona, and I almost died. I was crushed by a bull and ended up having to go to the hospital. That was exciting and interesting, but I wouldn't want to repeat that or recommend getting crushed to anyone. Burning Man was a mind-blowing experience. It just didn't make sense. It felt like it was outside of reality completely.
If you have one piece of advice to give to the youth listening, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, that the fundamental element that defines the quality of our lives are the people we surround ourselves with and the conversations that we have with them. So if you want to change anything in your life, either surround yourself with different people or change what you're talking about.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by Desare, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professionals. You can read more about us at desare.org. And you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.